I want you to know, am I on? Okay. I want you to know I appreciate your enthusiasm for leading prayer. I noticed that. You were up there getting up there after the second song, and it was supposed to be after the third song. Okay, that's good. There's an article in the Scientific American from July of 2018 that tells the story of a man who was 51 years old back in 1993. He was a ranking official of the European Economic Community. And he had a problem. His problem was that every time he decided to be a little bit deceitful, he would pass out and have a convulsion. Now, that would create a problem when you're brokering deals with these officials from different countries and you're not wanting to give them the whole truth about things. And so, obviously, he probably wasn't a very good poker player. Everybody would be able to take his money. But when this began happening to him, he didn't know why that was happening to him. The article calls him Mr. Pinocchio, by the way. So that's why Pinocchio's up here. He went to some doctors in France, and they discovered that he had a tumor on his brain about the size of a walnut, and it happened to be in a location in his brain that whenever he started to be deceptive, the neurons there would they would be affected by it, and that's why he would pass out. So what they did was they removed the tumor, and he was fine after that. He could lie as much as he wanted to. He was able to go back to work and be deceptive if he needed to be. But that's why they called him Mr. Pinocchio, was because there was a tell. You know, with Pinocchio, his nose would grow. Well, this man, he'd just pass out. So he was able to go back to work. Now, his consequences were pretty immediate. When he would lie, his consequences were pretty immediate. But for most of us, it's not that way. We can get away with little lies when nobody may notice for a while. The consequences may come eventually, but most of the time they're not immediate, depending on the context of the situation or what kind of lie it is and that. We see honesty as something that's good, right? I mean, that ability to be truthful, to be sincere, that's something that we want to have in our friends and the people that we know. Another word that's closely associated with that is integrity. Integrity is also is defined as being honest and having a moral uprightness. But there's another definition related to that, and that is the state of being whole and undivided. So if you're somebody who builds bridges, and let's say there's a bridge that has been damaged because a truck ran into it, they may say that the structural integrity of the bridge has been compromised, and as a result, it may not be safe for people to drive across because the stress of driving across that bridge may cause it to collapse. Well, the reality is that when we lie, that creates a certain kind of stress within us too. It creates a division within us. I mean, there is the truthful part of us that may be at war with the part that's being dishonest, and it can create some stress emotionally for us, for many people. Honesty and integrity, though, seem to be hard to come by today. When you think about just our world and our country, there seems to be a lack of integrity. It may be hard to see. And the reality is that truth can be manipulated a number of different ways, through sound bites or through marketing, good marketing, or possibly through loud voices that may want to get a different message across. And while people want others to have integrity, a lot of times they don't see it as being extremely important in themselves in certain situations. And so that's where we find ourselves. Now, on the nights that I'm speaking, we're talking about the Sermon on the Mount. And if you remember, what Jesus says near the end of the sermon is that these words are to be put into practice. He expects, they're not just ideas that we talk about, they are things that we actually do, that we put them into practice. And then, if you remember from some of our other discussions, Jesus begins to go to the heart of the matter. So he will say something that maybe they've heard before, and then will say, "But I say to you." And we've talked about righteousness, we've talked about lust, we've talked about adultery, we've talked about reconciliation and forgiveness. And all of these things are issues of the heart. Well, what we're talking about tonight is also an issue of the heart. I went back the wrong way. Okay. There we go. In Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37, Jesus says this. He says, again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Now, when Jesus says this, remember, he says, you've heard that it was said. Well, what he's referring to are some passages like this. In Leviticus chapter 19, it says, do not swear falsely by my name and so profane the name of the Lord or the name of your God. I am the Lord. Now, what he's saying is, don't swear one thing using my name and actually mean something else or say something else. Don't lie about it. And when he says profane my name, the word for profane means to make something common or unholy. God's name is holy. He's very clear about that in the Old Testament. And so if we make God's holy name unholy, then we're misusing his name. So don't swear falsely. In Deuteronomy 23, it says, if you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. So if you make a vow, then follow through on what you vowed. Otherwise, you're actually committing sin. He goes on, he says, but if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whatever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you made your vow freely to the Lord your God with your own mouth. So we don't have to make a vow. You can keep from doing that, and God's okay with that. But if you're going to make one, make sure you follow through on what you say, because that shows an extreme lack of integrity. We're going back to the passage in Matthew 5. Do not swear by the earth, or do not swear by heaven, for it is God's throne. Do not swear by the earth, for it is God's footstool. Do not swear by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. The reality is that none of these things really belong to us. I mean, the earth doesn't belong to us. I mean, God has given that to us to live in and to use and take care of, and yet it still belongs to God. Heavens do not belong to us. So, and we can't even change our hair color. Well, I guess we could change our hair color, right? But it doesn't really change the color of the hair, does it? I mean, you cover it up, right? Because if you let it go, it'll grow out eventually, right? So we can't do anything about that, not really. And so if we don't have the ability or the power to do that, why would we think that we should have the ability or power to swear by these things and so that someone will believe us? We really don't have that power and that ability. You know, when we were kids, did you ever learn how to lie and get away with it? I mean, where it didn't count, what did we do? Crossed our fingers, put it behind our back? How many of you guys did that? Yeah, okay, all right. So there's a few people that did it. So that means it doesn't count. Well, that's really not the way things work. You know, some have tried to use this passage to refer to, or they've used it in a way to say that, well, that means that you shouldn't go into a court of law and put your hand on the Bible or swear in that situation. I don't really think that's what Jesus is trying to talk about here. Now, it may be that if you feel very uncomfortable doing that, or you feel like you're going against what God's teaching, then you shouldn't do that. But I don't think that's really what Jesus is getting at. He's talking about integrity. He's talking about integrity here. We need to have integrity that runs deep, so deep that nothing we could say or swear would add anything to what we've already said. We need to be the kind of people that others can trust. They can trust that what we say is what we mean. The great theologian Tim Tebow, you know Tim Tebow, right? Okay, well, he said, my integrity means more to me than any fame or money. When I say something, I want people to take it to the bank, that I mean it and I believe it. That's really what Jesus is getting at. That when we say something, then people know that it's true, because we don't skirt the truth. But we live in a world where a lot of people don't trust that, especially based upon the way people have lived, because a lot of people live double lives. So that's where we find ourselves. Randy Harris is a professor at ACU, and he teaches Bible, and he has one particular class. I don't know which class it is, but he sets up this scenario in this class. And what he does is he says, okay, I want you guys to consider this is you. It's the beginning of the last semester for you in college. You've got a job lined up with a big company. You're an accountant, and it's going to have great pay, good benefits. It's a great company to work for. You have somebody that you're going to be getting married to. Everything's falling into place after you graduate. You've got one more semester left. You know that you've got about 3 classes related to your major that you need to deal with. You're excited about those classes, and then you get a call from the registrar that says, we noticed that you still have one general ed course you have to take that you haven't taken yet, and it's an English class. You don't like English, you like math. And so they can choose from about 3 or 4 different classes. And what turns out is that there's only one class that fits into your schedule. And the class that you're going to have to take is Early American Literature. Okay? So you decide that you go ahead and take that class. You're not excited about it, but you'll take it. You're not really worried about it. All you got to do is pass, so you don't need a great grade. You get to the syllabus, you see all the things you need to read, and the first book you're supposed to read is The Scarlet Letter. The way that Randy Harris describes it, it's a book all about sex, but it's like really boring, which doesn't seem to fit for a lot of people. And so you read that book. You don't like reading that book because you don't really like English stuff, and you don't read a lot anyway. You really like numbers. You get to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, and you read those books, and that's a little bit better, but still, not too excited. Then you get to poetry, and at least it's short, but nothing seems to rhyme, and you don't really understand it as well. And what you discover is by this time, your grade's not really good, but you're passing. It's good enough. You're not too worried about it. And then you get to Moby Dick. And it's 600 pages of whaling. And you're from Kansas, and you don't care about whales at all. So you don't really want to read this book, and you think, I've read all these other things. And so this time, what I'm going to do is I am going to get the Cliff Notes. Because the people who wrote the Cliff Notes probably know it better than me anyway. And when I take the test, they'll give me enough information so that I can pass. And plus, not only that, I'm going to go the extra mile. I'm going to watch the movie with Gregory Peck in it, okay? So I'm going to watch the movie. I'm going to know the whole story. And so you're prepared. And you get to the test. And this is the final. And there's one question. And the question is, did you read Moby Dick? And if you answer truthfully, you'll get a 0, and you will likely not pass your class. And if you don't pass your class, then you're going to have to take it over because you're not going to be able to graduate. And if you don't graduate, you don't get the job. And if you don't get the job and you haven't passed your class, then your fiance is going to think you're an idiot because you couldn't do some English class and pass it. And so all the things that you had fallen into place are now about ready to crumble. What do you do? And so what he does, he has this discussion with all of his students. And he says 90 to 95% of my students say they lie. And they have all kinds of reasons for this. One is Melville, the author of the book, he's dead, so who cares? I mean, he doesn't care, right? Others say, but God wants me to get this job, because if I get this job, then I'll have money so I can give it to poor people. And God wants me to give the money to the poor people, right? And he wants me to be married, okay? It's a victimless crime. It doesn't hurt anybody. I mean, nobody's going to care whether I read this book or not. And so they rationalize all this stuff. And so what he does, he has this conversation with them about this, and then he makes this comment. He says, when it comes down to it, if the cost is high enough, our integrity is for sale. And that's where we're at. And so it's really a discussion about integrity. What are we going to do? Even in this little things, are we going to skirt the truth? Are we going to cut corners? And then what are the little things for us? What are the things that we have a tendency to fudge on or lie about? Albert Einstein said, whoever is careless with the truth in small matters cannot be trusted in important affairs. So if we are untruthful in the little things, then what will happen with the big things, especially if the cost is too high? I remember when I was in elementary school, we lived in Southern California. My grandparents were managing an apartment complex in Southern California, and we went to go visit them, and then we were leaving one evening. We all got in the car, and as we were driving down the street, there was something in the middle of the road, and so my parents, I think my dad got out and picked it up, and it was a purse. So they pull it into the car, and they think, well, there's nobody around. Whose purse is this? And they drive down the street behind a building, a store, and they open up the purse to look at it, and it's got like a passport, so the person whose purse it is doesn't live here. They live someplace far away. We didn't have cell phones back then, so there was no phone number either, so there was no way to call them. There were credit cards and other things in the purse, and then $1,500. And so my parents are sitting there talking to each other about, what do we do? Well, we can take it to the police. No, we can't take it to the police because then they'll take it, and then who knows? They might even take the money. You know, they have this conversation going on. So the little kids are in the back seat listening to this whole conversation. And so they're trying to figure out, well, should we take the $1,500 because that's a lot of money? And then they think, no, well, they finally decided, let's go back. Let's go back and see if we can find the person. So they go back, and there's some people outside. They're walking around looking for something. And so they hollered over to one of them and asked what they were looking for. They were looking for a purse. And so what they do is they take it upstairs. There was a lady who had set it on her car. She drove off. The purse fell off. And then she came back to try to find it. So they took it up to her, gave her purse back. She looked through it to make sure everything was there. And then she gave them $100. So it worked out, right? But the interesting thing is they sat there for about 10 minutes trying to figure out, what do we do? Because maybe no one else will ever know. There are articles that you may see in magazines and maybe in books that will talk to you about how integrity leads to success. And in that situation, integrity did lead to success for them, even though they struggled with it. They got a benefit. They got $100 out of it. But so let's say, here's a couple of titles. Achieve Success with Integrity. That's from training.com. Integrity is the key to success. That's from leadershipblog.com. And there are other articles that you might read. I believe that there is a correlation between integrity and success to some extent. But integrity doesn't always lead you to success. And that depends on how you define success. But sometimes integrity can lead you to a place that may cost you, like the deal with Moby Dick and how you answer the question. The question isn't really whether integrity leads to success or brings us to success. The question is, will we still have integrity when it leads us to the cross? When it leads us to a place where it may cost us something. That's what we have to ask ourselves. And the thing is, we need to make that decision before we get there. Because if we don't make the decision before we get there, we will likely make the wrong decision. So, how do we make those decisions? How do we make sure that we live lives of integrity so that people will be able to count on us when we speak? The point is that the true followers of Jesus are people of deep integrity. That's what God calls us to. That's what Jesus is calling us to in his sermon. And so while we may be tempted at times to cut corners, we may be tempted sometimes to fudge on some things because the cost seems too great. The question is, what are we really giving up? How are we really hurting ourselves? Because if we can't be trusted, and if our word's not worth anything, then what really is worth something with regard to us? I mean, if we're going to be followers of Christ, we have to be different. We have to live different kinds of lives. Because there will be times when people will doubt us. There will be times when people may question us. But if we are the kind of people that are consistently honest, consistently people of integrity, then when those times come, people will discover where the truth is, and it'll be with us. So that's my encouragement to you. Be prepared for those times before they come. Make sure that you're the kind of person that when you say something, someone can really count on you. Because what that does, it also speaks not only to who you are, but it speaks to who God is to us. And if we represent Him, let's represent Him well. If there's anything that we can help you with tonight, if you're struggling with anything, we're here to pray together and encourage one another. We ask you to come as we stand and sing.